ever produced was one that asked the question whether the US should go to the metric system. So we all know how that was implemented. I also wanted to draw your attention to this 1961 letter from the Space Studies Board to James Webb, the NASA administrator. The primary scientific goals of this program are immense: a better understanding of the origins of the solar system and the universe, the investigation of the existence of life on other planets, and potentially an understanding of the origin of life itself. To me, you might think that that was written today. So the moon obviously has a key role in the answer to that question. Just quickly, the Space Studies Board has committees that report to it, including CAPS, the committee on, your committee, the Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science. So you have a very bright future. Looking here at this chart, you can see that year over year, the Planetary Science Division increased 24%. The blue is the Senate bill, the gray, the red is the Trump request, and then finally the gray is what was actually enacted. So this is 2018. You can say, well, maybe last year was terrific, but as many of you surely know, and I know Lori knows quite well, let's take a look at the chart over more years. You can see a very nice upswing in the Planetary Science Division budget there. More or less $2.4 billion increase over the last decade. So when it comes to prioritizing what Planetary is doing in the Decadal survey process, this is a really fantastic good news story. I must say that in my opinion, some of the decadals, the first decadal was back in 2003. That was when the report was delivered. And I believe it really helped because that was when New Frontiers was created. And in part, it was supported by the Decadal survey process and NASA headquarters. And that's how there is a new mission line item. The jealous other divisions, I think, are clear. Go ahead and talk to them if you want to know. The ability to be able to get a new mission line item, I don't think there's another division who's been able to do this with the kind of sustainment. And now new missions get selected by SMD and not with congressional approval. It's just a mission line. Here are past decadals. As you can see, Planetary picked up the baton after a long and enormously successful astrophysics and astronomy decadal survey series and was successful with it. The others followed suit. What are the typical elements of a decadal survey? And I will note every decadal survey is different. Every community, every scientific community in SMD is different, so they're tailored for the community and for the time. But in general, it's a broad survey of the current state of knowledge. There's an inventory of top-level science questions. Recommendations are to optimize the balance between targeted missions, large, medium, and small, and ground versus space, so an appropriately diverse portfolio. There's an assessment of infrastructure and technology and a prioritized list of recommended strategic space missions, ground-based facilities, and supporting research. Some of the past rules from Planetary are here, so they don't have to be the rules for this time. That gets negotiated with Lori and with SMD and the national academies. Everything last time without a budget line item was within scope. Missions that had been extensively discussed but hadn't hit phase A yet in SMD parlance were included in the prioritization. Surveys have not usually prioritized small missions, as you well know. The discoveries are prioritized by the competition that SMD undertakes to select those. A little bit of a notional scheme that we have discussed with Lori for this Planetary decadal survey. So the task should be finalized and funding from SMD to the National Academies January in the start of the new year. February, white paper submission. I'll talk a little bit more about that. In March at LPSC, we hope to be announcing the chair or chairs. The deadline for submission of white papers is more or less May. Survey and committee members, panel member meetings gear up in June. The first draft is completed in 2021 and release in March of 2021. So that's the notional schedule. That will get finalized as we go and work with Lori. Some relevant studies for this decadal are ones you know well. These are National Academies studies. I'm not going to read them all. They're on our website, but I want to draw your attention particularly to the three in yellow, the midterm review, just finished. And these two, exoplanet and astrobiology strategy, were congressionally directed and meant as input to the decadal survey process. And I believe the others you know well. So in past decadals, there was a process called CATE, which centered in the acronym on cost. This is the same process, but we changed the name to TRACE. The reason for that is it is really a technical kind of review, trying to determine the risk of a mission and then how it fits in a cost box. The reason why the Academies does this is because it provides NASA with an independent evaluation of the concepts. And it basically levels the field between concepts that might be at a very different phase of development and information. This gets competed by the National Academies, and all of this independent of the agency. Every time there is a decadal, aerospace, the Aerospace Corporation tends to win this competition, and they have done so again in Astro 2020. But every time we go out with a broad area announcement to see who is the best to do this. Oh, look at that, my cost box is outside the words, as can happen when you evaluate a mission. Engaging with the science community. This is an extensive and very critical part of every decadal. The call for science white papers, the call for program white papers, then we undergo town halls, webinars, everything we can think of to reach out and connect with different audiences. There's ongoing outreach and communications throughout a decadal. Just as a note, there were 600 submissions for science papers, and every single one of those will be read by the appropriate panel and steering committee. The second round was a call for activities, projects, and state of the profession. There were 300 submissions. I don't know whether there's any ESA Europeans in the room, but just to give you a little bit of scale about how vigorous our communities, our scientific communities are here in the US. The Voyage 2050 call recently for science papers resulted in something like 200. So this is terrific. They all get read. So I think it shows the vibrancy of the community. Early career focus session. We at the Academies put on an early career focus session before the kickoff for Astro 2020, and it was, just incredibly successful. There is such a need, and Lori has recognized that need, and Lori and Thomas will be working with the Academies to make sure that we really push that much harder for planetary. This was something the Academies just did with discretionary money, but because this was a success and because they recognize that there is a huge need to involve young professionals in this effort. For Astro 2020, they wrote white paper. They came to our National Academies Space Studies Board meeting, and I think that was just the way to go. So we'll try to duplicate that, but expand it with Lori and Thomas's help. Just a little bit about the gold standard. At the Academies, we work really hard to make sure these committees meet these three criteria. They obviously need the expertise, but there needs to be a balance of perspectives, and we screen for conflicts of interest. And by balance, it's a balance across multiple dimensions. Obviously, gender is a key one, diversity is a key one, but diversity includes diversity across the United States, diversity at the institutions, etc. So the process is extreme. And we get advice from National Academy's members who review and review and review this before we can put in a panel. So hundreds of community members participate in every decadal survey, and they volunteer their time, which I think is just really incredible. Again, it shows, you know, if you're looking in DC for a process that is inclusive, where people have divergent interests, but they come together behind a goal, the decadal survey works, and let's make sure it keeps working. Just a little montage of the outcomes from prior decadals. I think you can take a glance and you know and love many of these missions. These are the large flagship missions for the most part that have been approved by a decadal and then built and launched. So I just want to thank you so much for this event and for being here, and you can find every report ever published by the Space Studies Board. You can download it for free onto your computer. If you want hard copy, that's the only thing that actually costs because we have to print them, but everything else can either be read online or downloaded for free. So with that, I'm going to open it up and I hope you'll have questions. Thank you very much. One question.
So is that on? Maybe not. It's hard to believe people can't hear me, but what's it? The microphone's not on? There it is. Okay. So Bill Bodke, Southwest Research Institute. So the last decadal survey process, there was sort of a feeling in the community that more white papers is better. So if the moon got 100 white papers and Jupiter got 50 white papers, the moon must be a higher priority. So how will the number of white papers, or what do you want to see from white papers from the community? How are they evaluated and weighted? Is it numbers that count? Is it quality that counts? Is it the number of signatures that counts? What do you think?
So let me answer that by giving you a little thought experiment. If you were on a panel of the decadal, would it matter? Would you count up how many papers on a subject you got? I contend you would not. Instead, you would read those papers, and the ones that were compelling would be the ones that rose to the top. So there is, I can say unequivocally, there is no metric by which numbers are weighted and therefore individuals change their mind based on the number of papers on the moon versus the number of papers on another target destination. Right. So what matters is the quality. And white papers are only one input to the process. So these experts that we convene, right now for Astro 2020, it's about 130 people have their backgrounds and their expertise that they're bringing to the table. The white papers help inform them, but it's only one part.
Okay. No, the reason I asked this is that later on we're going to have breakout sessions and we're supposed to suggest white papers. And we were having a discussion last night, is it better to have a lot of white papers or a few ones that cover a lot of topics but then are high quality? So.
And I'm really happy you asked that question. I should have put it actually in the charts because I have heard people were debating that very question. Yeah. That was true for Astro 2020 as well. So, it's a very simple question to answer. No, the numbers don't matter.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Very much appreciate the question. Hi.
Hi, Parvati Prem, APL. I was wondering about the process for the formation of the committees. Is there a nomination process or is it selection, anointment?
Great question again, and I should have mentioned that. There is a process which also includes self-nomination. So anyone can nominate either themselves or colleagues, and we keep massive spreadsheets of every single person who has been nominated. When a chair is designated, the chair and the National Academy's staff will look at how do we want to populate the next step and decide. And they use that spreadsheet to help inform them of people who are interested, people who are available, people who, and there's, let me emphasize, there is no, this is not like, this is more like a presidential election where saying you want to run for president isn't considered negative. So feel free to nominate yourself if you are interested.
Thanks.
Thanks. Appreciate the question.
Hi, Barbara Cohen, Nessa Goddard. I've seen a couple different versions of the schedule for this planetary decadal, and I understand that there's nothing set in stone and there's no real schedule yet. When can we expect to get clarity on the schedule and when white papers will be due?
So I think that will happen more, clearly in January. We're going to be looking at a chair or co-chairs. One of the problems with saying there's a definitive schedule before at least you have the chair of the panel of the steering committee is that that individual may have problems with certain dates. But we will open up, as soon as we get that, we open up the white papers as soon as we possibly can. So that isn't a very satisfying answer for you, but we're beginning the phase where Lori, David Smith, and I, and Michael New are coming to a convergence. And once that statement of task looks like it is in a good state, then I'll be able to really answer that question. But we will do it as soon as we possibly can. Prepare for your white papers. That announcement will be coming, and they will be incredibly welcome. And as I said, every single white paper gets read.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Jonathan Weinberg, Ball Aerospace. This may be a question for Lori as well, but I'm going to ask you as well, Colleen. And has there been any thought or discussion or decisions now made on how the decadal is going to be organized and whether it's going to be reorganized by major science themes or if it's going to continue to be organized by planetary target with cross-cutting themes as it has for the last two decadals?
So that can be in the statement of task. That gets negotiated between the agency and the academies, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. When it isn't in the statement of task, it is up to the academies and the chair, and there is no NASA involvement. So again, the reason why Lori NASA Thomas is coming to the National Academies is because there is strict divide once that statement of task is done. There's still briefings by Lori to the steering committee and the panel committees for information, but there's zero direction. The statement of task, however, that said, it can say, we expect you to have more or less this configuration. So that's an either or. It can be left entirely up to the staff and chairs, or it can be in the statement of task, but it's TBD until then.
And when is the statement of task expected to be issued, or is that a question for Lori?
No, it was on my schedule. We're hoping that will be completely codified with funding in January. Okay. And perhaps because Lori is such an overachiever, perhaps before then.
Thank you.
Hi, Louise Proctor from the LPI. Hi, Colleen. Just a point of information for everyone. Although the official NASA Academy's website for the white papers won't be open, I guess, until February at the earliest, we have been asked to set up a sort of community website at the LPI. So this was done last time by Steve Mackwell for the last decadal. And so we'll be doing that again. We hope to get that up in maybe certainly within the next month, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And it'll be a very simple website, but it's just an opportunity for everyone to post potential white paper titles and solicit interest from the community for those. So that'll be for we're trying to decide also how to structure it, which is why I thought I should mention it, whether you should be able to select by body or by question. So at the moment, that's a bit up in the air, but there'll be somewhere where at least people can communicate with each other ahead of time and just get going on the white papers before the official request comes out. So thanks.
Lillian Ostrak, USGS. So Sam did a really great job talking about the importance of next generation and early career scientists. And besides the self-nomination, is there a means for early career scientists to get involved? Or is there like a placeholder helping position type? For instance, in the NASA RNA proposal process, the panel reviews, there is an executive secretary position for first-time early career folks to participate in the process and learn how the process works. And so that's my question, is how can the early career folks get involved in this process, learn how it works, et cetera?
Yes, so there are two areas in which early career can learn and be involved. The first is the follow-on we expect to take from the very successful early career Astro 2020 event, and Lori and Thomas are going to fund a lot more vigor in that effort. So that is pre-decadal. And secondly, in the decadal itself, there will be an opening and discussions with the chair and then the steering committee with staff from the national academies who are I'm committed very much to see early career, where appropriate, involved in the decadal process itself. And lastly, there's the ability to actually present during a decadal to the steering committee or a particular panel. So there are lots of opportunities. And then the fourth is that for instance, the co-chairs of Astro 2020 with National Academy staff have begun targeted town halls and targeted webinars where they invite early career individuals to participate, and then they can address their questions specifically. So I think, I hope you can tell, we at the academies are incredibly committed to that kind of outreach, and we have the full support of NASA.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was a great discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Lori Glaze, the Director of the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters.